Right. Well, welcome to this seminar on the Oxford Programme for Asian Laws. Thank you to my colleagues on for setting it up. And to Israel Khan, a student in the Centre for Social Legal Studies, for inviting our very distinguished speaker, Justice Qazi Faez Isa. I hope I've got the pronunciation right.
Perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Fernanda Pirie. I'm professor of the Anthropology of Law here in the Centre for Social Legal Studies, and it's my great privilege to introduce our speaker today and moderate this discussion. So just a few words about our speaker. Mr. Justice Isa is currently senior judge of the Supreme Court in Pakistan, a position he's occupied since 2014. Before that, he was Chief Justice of the Balochistan High Court, 2009 to 14, and before that, a distinguished advocate, both at the Balochistan Supreme High Court and the Supreme Court of Pakistan. He has written about media law, but he, I think, fair to say, takes a particular interest in environmental law and public interest litigation. And writes regularly for the English language press on law, environment, heritage, constitutions. And he's been involved in a number of, I think, quite controversial judgments and speeches on the rule of law, I think we can say. And in particular, they're being critical of institutions like the army and security services when they fall below the expected legal standards. But today we are going to hear his thoughts on, I think, environmental law and how it is rooted in and related to Islamic law itself. So, Mr. Justice Isa.
Thank you for inviting me. Global warming, climate change, climatic events, shrinking polar ice caps, melting glaciers, desertification, soil erosion, reduced soil fertility, watershed destruction, aquifer depletion, species habitat destruction, species extinction, accumulation of non-biodegradables, microplastics, CFCs, damage to the ozone layer, water pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, noise pollution. These terms and concepts were unheard of a couple of centuries ago. When I was growing up, even then they were not known about or let alone talked about. And now these things threaten humanity. So what does the book of Muslims, the Holy Quran, offer? A revelation which came down 1400 years ago, and the Prophet, the medium of the revelation, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It took about 22 years, the entire book to be compiled. Direct speech of God to mankind. Does it offer any solutions? Can we travel back in time? Is there salvation, or is salvation only in the hereafter? Or can lessons be learned from the teachings and made applicable to today's world and possibly to the future? So, in other words, is there any practical application of Islamic teachings in law particularly, and in the context of Pakistan even more specifically? A few words about the religion. The Quran comprises of about 6,000 verses, about 750 are directly pertaining to the environment. It has 114 chapters. 1/3 are named after nature or natural phenomena. For example, chapter named the cow, bees, ants, spider, elephant, star, moon, fig, palm fiber, daybreak, light, dawn, sun. So you get the sort of, it's very nature oriented. Yeah, I'm at the Faculty of Law, and in a court of law, one swears by something sacred. the case of Christians, it's the Bible. For Hindus, it's the Gita. For Muslims, it's the Holy Quran. And so you take oath and you say, I swear to tell the truth and whole truth, nothing but the truth. But does God swear? What is sacred to him? In our faith, God does swear, and he swears by what is probably the most sacred to him, his own creation. And examples of that are by the fig and the olive. These are all verses from the Quran. By the morning light, by the sun and its radiance, by the land, by the pen and what it inscribes. So these are all different verses of the Holy Quran. And the name for the creator for himself is Al-Khaliq, literally the creator. And he says that I created everything. Everything on the earth, everything in the skies, and everything in between. These are all Quranic verses. And why did he create everything? That also is addressed. And the Quranic translation is created it for the truth. Bil haqqi, haqq, for the truth. Now, in Islamic tradition, God has 99 names or 99 attributes. He is Rabbul Alameen, the God of the worlds. He is Al-Mubdi, the originator. These names pertaining to today's talk. Al-Muhi, the giver of life. Al-Khaliq, the creator. Al-Musawwir, the artist creator. So there is artistry in creation as well. And the last of creation is human beings, and they are also designated as the best of creation, Ahsanul Taqweem. So this the best of creation and the last of creation. Having created man, there are responsibilities, and the Quran designates man as Khalifa fil Ard. Khalifa, Khalif, Ard is earth, on earth, Khalif on earth. English translations of the Holy Quran, there are different ones that use the word. The translation for Khalifa fil Ard is vicegerent, steward, or caretaker. These are the sort of acceptable translations of the term, though it is much wider. And why has this responsibility been placed upon human beings? So that he may test you. Another verse from the Holy Quran. Now, the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan connects the sublime, connects with the sublime. Its opening words, its very opening words are, where, and I quote, whereas sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Almighty Allah alone, and the authority to be exercised by the people of Pakistan within the limits prescribed by him is a sacred trust. So there is democracy is enshrined in the Constitution, but it is a sacred trust. And we have Article 227 in the Constitution as well, which mandates that no law can be made contrary to the injunctions of Islam. So there is, Islam makes its way into the law and practical application of it. So you can, as a practitioner of law, as a lawyer, as a judge, use these concepts to canvass your point of view or advance it. It's legitimate legal method to do so. Now, how has Islam been used to advance the environmental agenda in Pakistan? I'll give you practical demonstrations of 5 different judgments. There are many more. These are my own judgments, so I can sort of, I just took those, but they are not the only ones. The first is the case of the Hubara bastard. The Hubara bastard is a quote threatened with extinction. The different categories in the IUCN Red List. So this has been listed as threatened with extinction. It's a migratory bird which comes to our part of the world in certain months. Pakistan is a signatory to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, and the Convention on Migratory Species of Wild Animals. And both these conventions, treaties are protected by legislation, which is the Pakistan Trade Control of Wild Fauna and Flora Act of 2012. Now, these birds are much sought after by the well-to-do of the Arab world, and for the government would give them permits to come and hunt. They usually use falcons for hunting purposes. The sheikhs to come to Pakistan to hunt these birds. Someone challenged it that this violates the law of Pakistan as well as these treaties. So I will now just want to actual practical demonstration. I think the best would be to read from the judgment itself. I can give you the links. Most of them are available on video links. I can leave copies behind as well. Now, how does one craft environmental concerns, Islam, into a judgment? That's where I come in as a judge. So I'm quoting now from my own judgment. Amongst the constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights, I should just mention that what you refer to as human rights, we refer to as fundamental rights in the Constitution of Pakistan. They're more or less the same. Is the right to life, Article 9, dignity, Article 14, the right to profess and practice one's religion, Article 20, and the Constitution, as I mentioned, starts with the preamble, and before that comes, it says Bismillah, which is literally in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. And then the preamble, which I have read. So illuminating, I again refer back to the judgment, illuminating the Constitution, the preamble reminds us that Almighty Allah alone is the sovereign, and the people of Pakistan are to exercise the authority as his trustees. This mirrors the Quranic concept of humans being vicegerents or stewards, Khalifa fil Ard. Stewards, as opposed to absolute owners, cannot use or exploit natural resources with abandon, nor hunt a species till its status becomes vulnerable or extinct. If any species, for want of habitat or as a result of hunting or exploitation, is endangered or becomes extinct, the Khalifa violates his or her trust. We alone of all of Almighty's creation have been bestowed with the responsibility to maintain the balance and not to rupture the order of nature. I quote the Quranic verse, do not waste, verily he, Allah, does not like those who waste. The word is musrifun. Another quotation from the Quran, and do not do mischief on the earth after it has been set in order. Unquote. Actions that destroy, devastate, or impair his creation are prohibited. If a species was to be hunted till it becomes extinct or vulnerable, it would impair a Muslim's ability to lead his or her life in accordance with religion and to practice it, thus violating Article 20. It is important to heed our duties as stewards of the earth for the preservation and conservation of natural resources and to take care of Allah's creatures. Another quotation from the Quran, have you not seen that Allah is glorified by all in the heavens and on the earth, such as the birds with wings outspread? Each knows its worship and glorification. Another quote, there is not a thing but hymned his praise. So, and now I quote from another scholar of Islam, Sayyid Hussain Nasr, from the book, The Spiritual and Religious Dimension of the Environmental Crisis. And I quote, For every time we destroy a species, we are destroying a prayerful being. It is like murdering someone while he is praying. It is abominable as that. So, if I may continue, in neglecting the environmental teachings of Islam, we ignore our duty as his stewards towards his creation. The Quranic verses describe nature and natural phenomena, as I mentioned, about 750 times, roughly 1/8 of the Quran. I proceed and there's another book from quotation. It is an enormous responsibility since man must eventually give an account of his stewardship of the resources of the planet. It is obviously essential that there should be great emphasis on the scientific study of every detail of natural systems and of the effects of human technology upon them. It is equally important for scientists to make proposals for ways in which the resources of the earth, which have been given to us by Allah, should be used with minimum disturbance to the environment and maximum concern for the maintenance of harmony and equilibrium. This is Science Within Islam by Yunus Negus. Proceeding onwards, the fundamental right to life and to live with dignity, Articles 9 and 14, as I mentioned, of the Constitution, is one lived in a world that has an abundance of all species, not only for the duration of our lives, but available for our progeny too. It has now been scientifically established that if the earth became bereft of birds, animals, insects, trees, plants, clean rivers, unpolluted air, soil, it will be the precursor of our destruction or extinction. The United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development, chaired by the former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, published the report Our Common Future in 1987, which was the forerunner of the innumerable reports and treaties, the two I've mentioned, CITES and CMS. The issues that were pointed out in the report over a quarter of a century ago have, with the efflux of time, attained greater criticality under the chapter Species and Ecosystems than I mentioned from that report. So just showing how we can connect the spiritual with the mundane and maybe take things forward, given the environment that I live in, the environment of Pakistan. Naturally, the environment here is different. You will use maybe Shakespeare or whatever you want to use here. So the environment there is, every country has its own environment where the message of the courts must resonate with the people as well. So scientific, again, I just will last quote from this judgment. Scientific research too has by now incontrovertibly established that nothing in nature was created without wisdom, value, and purpose. Our Creator says, quote, "We have not created the heavens and the earth and all that is between them for mere play. We have created them but for truth." In conclusion, it would be apt to quote Shah Abdul Latif, a Sufi poet from Pakistan, quotation, "The birds in the flocks fly comradeship, they do not decry. Behold, among the birds there is more loyalty than among us who call ourselves humanity." So this way one weaves in the Islamic jurisprudence into judgments within the contours of the Constitution to not only justify the judgment, but in a way to connect with the majority of the people, if not all the people. So I think those judgments are the best, which do all this with the connect with the people. There may be a judgment, but the people are not convinced. I don't understand this. So this is another way to do that. Coming to the next judgment, this is on another species. It's actually the national animal of Pakistan. It's categorized as, it's the Markhor sheep. It's a wild sheep, maybe, I don't know, they must be in Tibet as well. It has horns tall, and they're like screwed in the spiral, like probably, like a gyre. Reminds me of Yeats. What's it? The last coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So I think there is an environmental message by Yeats there as well. This case was under the Balochistan Wildlife Protection Act of 1974. Two markhors had been shot, and the maximum punishment prescribed in the law is 2 years imprisonment and a fine. The magistrate who tried the case sentenced the person, the perpetrator, to 6 months and fined them 3,000 rupees each, which is roughly 15 pounds. When the convict appealed, the sentence was reduced to 10 days and the fine was reduced to 1,000. Came up before me in the High Court when I was Chief Justice of the Balochistan High Court, and he wanted a complete exoneration or acquittal. I issued him notice that why should I not restore the sentence of the magistrate, even which it's in itself was on the lesser side. And then another dimension of Islam was used. We have the Probation Offenders Ordinance of 1960, that is to make people go to jail and serve out sentences, so they are on probation. Now I think the new concept that has developed here is a community service order. So you pay back to community, rather than you're in jail, you're sort of burden on the exchequer. Probably you go in as a lesser criminal, come out as a bigger one. So it's a waste of resources. There's no sense of retribution. There's no sense of giving back to community. So the community service orders, I believe, are quite the rage here. So in our law, it does not specifically provide for a community service order, but the probation law provided that the judge may pass any order. So I kind of gave it an extended meaning, and I tried to bring in the concept of the community service order, that whether it can be done or not. And there is a seminal work by Professor Shane Kilcommins of the Faculty of Law of the University of Cork, which I sort of extensively quote in my judgment. It's the introduction of community service orders, mapping its conditions and possibility. So I use that concept, and I'll just show you how Islam comes in both with regard to preservation, conservation, and the community service order. So I'll quote, this is from this judgment about the Markhor. It now needs to be examined whether this is an appropriate case in which to make a probation order. The petitioners killed 2 Markhors, faced the rigor of a criminal trial, were sentenced, briefly incarcerated, and paid a small fine, and are now required to serve the remaining sentence of 5 months and 20 days in jail. The question arises whether for their crime they should be sent to jail, or they and society will be better served if they are placed under the supervision of a probation officer. However, in my opinion, periodically recording attendance before a probation officer does not have an element of reparation or payback. So, and then I proceed to connect with our own tradition, and I quote, the genesis of the community, after discussing Professor professor's thing on community service orders, I then write, the genesis of the community service orders may well be the example set by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. After the Battle of Badr, which is 13th March 624 AD, each prisoner of war that was taken could win his freedom by teaching 10 Muslims to read and write. The Prophet's example, by offering offenders the option to make a reparation by doing constructive work for the community, may well be categorized as a community service order. So Western concept, which probably predates, was an Islamic concept, was forgotten in the Islamic world, has been brought back through this device, as I mentioned, to serve a purpose of both of conservation and also justifying why such an order is being passed. So that was happily done. I think the order that was passed was that he has to plant a certain number of trees, each person, and he has to take care of the trees. It was on a road. Government doesn't have the resources for a period of 2 years, and it will be monitored. So that was the community service order. And the reason why I asked this, it has to have the consent of the convict. He happily agreed rather than go to jail. I asked him, what do you know what to do? He says, I'm a farmer. So that was the reason why this particular community service order was passed in that case. I mean, sort of, that was really left to the judge, which was me in the case. There have been some tricky cases as well. Land grabs take place, I think, everywhere, and it also happens on our part of the world. And whenever there's a nice park, someone puts up a mosque there. Now, if anybody puts up a mosque, I mean, all hell will break loose if you object. So that's one device. Now here, it was, can this be done? I mean, sort of park, environment, mosque, Islam, sort of, how do you balance these? So coming to the judgment, the illegal construction of a mosque in a park. So I had to justify the demolition of the mosque if I just passed a short order saying that it may have had consequences. So it had to be moored, anchored in Islam, whether such act is permissible or not. So, and after sort of a number of Islamic scholars were sent notices to, questions were asked of them, they responded, I collected all those answers, put them together in the judgment, and I conclude in paragraph 30. We can thus safely conclude that the act of raising any construction in the vehicle parking area of the park is contrary to Quranic injunctions and the examples and sayings of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So that from the aforesaid discussions, we can derive the following sort of principles. I'll skip that. And now I mention what constitutes a Sharia mosque. Sharia literally means sort of the proper mosque. To constitute a Sharia masjid, mosque, the following conditions must be fulfilled. Firstly, the land must be given with consent and without fear, threat, or coercion. Secondly, the land must be given by the legal owner of the land who is capable to grant it. Thirdly, it must be legally accepted. And fourthly, the land must be separated from the land in which another has an interest therein, including one's own. So to forcefully build a mosque on others' land, including land held by the government or a statutory authority, is tantamount to devouring someone else's property and a sin. There is a distinction between a Sharia mosque, a mosque which is built in accordance with Sharia, and Jai Musalla, a place where people may simply pray. And a Jai Musalla does not constitute a Sharia mosque. So this, I mean, for instance, if I decide to pray here, this won't become a mosque, it will become a place I have prayed. So that doesn't change the status of this place. So therefore, and I concluded with this, therefore, for the aforesaid reasons, we direct Quetta Development Authority to take back possession of the area situated in the vehicle parking area of the park where partial construction has been raised and to demolish it. So this, again, the use of Islamic concepts and principles to safeguard both the environment and to correct a wrong that had taken place. So the fourth case, moving on to, it's about cranes, the bird, and it discusses this Islamic concept of wildlife protection. So I just let the judgment speak for itself. The case pertained to illegal possession of 190 cranes, a protected species under the Act, and one of the God's creatures. And I quote a Quranic verse, "There is not a moving, living creature on earth, nor a bird that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you." Unquote. Human beings have been made Khalifa fil ard, guardians or vicegerents of God's creation on earth, and thus must properly acquit themselves of such responsibility. The Quran calls on believers to reflect on the wonders of nature and to consider the perfect balance. Al-Mizan, another word for the book Quran is Al-Mizan, the balance in which Allah maintains the natural world. Therefore, it is every person's and every duty to maintain the fragile equilibrium of creation. The glorious Quran also mentions other functions which these creatures perform and which man may not perceive, namely function of worshipping God, declaring his praise and bowing down to him. The seven heavens and the earth, this is a Quranic quotation. The seven heavens and the earth and all the beings therein proclaim his glory. There is not a thing but celebrates his praise, but you understand not how they declare his glory. So I will now in our faith, after the Quran, it is what the Prophet said or did. These are referred to as the traditions or hadith, which is the secondary source of how one should live and after the Holy Quran. And now I quote the examples of the Prophet. The Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, extolled his followers and the Ummah is the community, Muslim community, to show kindness to animals. One familiar story from the life of the Prophet recounts how during a journey, one of his companions removed a baby bird from a nest. He confronted him to return the bird to its nest. And now the quotation, for charity shown to each creature with a wet heart, there is reward, the Prophet declared. The Prophet said that he who is kind and merciful towards animals, Allah will be kind and merciful towards him. Another tradition recounts how a prostitute's sins were washed away because she gave drinking water to a thirsty dog. When the people asked, O Messenger of God, is there a reward in doing good to these animals? He said, and I quote, there is reward in doing good to every human thing. Going away from our tradition and coming towards yours, the poet, and this I wrote in the judgment as well, the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge captures the essence of the Islamic tradition in his epic, The Ancient Mariner. He prayeth well, who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. He prayeth best, who loveth best all things great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. So the same traditions expressed differently there are and are very powerful tools to get the message of the protection, the conservation of environment across from in different cultures and different faiths. And now I come to the last case, the fifth case. This pertained to parks and the benefits of greenery in Islam. So here what was happening was that a park was being virtually hemmed in by multi-storied buildings. And the matter was brought to the court by some interested parties that this is undermining their fundamental rights. So that's the background. I just do a few quotations from the judgment, and here I extensively relied upon scientific research. Quotation, it is by now irrefutably and scientifically established that trees, there was issue of trees and trees being cut, that trees play very important and beneficial roles. The United States Department of Agriculture says trees in New York City removed an estimated 1,821 metric tons of air pollution in '94. In an area, another quote from an American report, in an area with 100% tree cover, such as forest grows within parks, trees can remove as much as 15% of the ozone, 14% of sulfur dioxide, 13% of particulate matter, 8% of nitrogen oxide, 0.05% of carbon monoxide, and sort of another quotation from, I won't mention the sources, they're all sort of listed there. Trees and soil under them filter water pollution by removing polluted particulate matter from water before it reaches storm sewers, and absorbing nutrients created by human activity such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which otherwise pollute streams and lakes. So it sort of goes on and on anchoring the judgment in scientific knowledge. And now I sort of add my bit. The principle of policy, these are the principles enshrined in the Constitution. After the fundamental rights come the principles of policy. Envisage provision of basic necessities, which includes medical relief and the fundamental right to life. Article 9, which as interpreted by the Supreme Court does not mean nor can it be restricted only to the vegetative or animal life or mere existence, and therefore by necessary implication includes the right to lead a healthy life. Parks and open spaces and the trees they contain also have many health benefits. Parks encourage and provide a space for physical activity which can effectively combat obesity and chronic disease. There's a lot of medical stuff here as well, which I will skip. Another little bit. It is also now generally considered as true that access to parks and open spaces has a positive impact on stress, depression, and mental functioning. A quotation from a scientific paper: parks and open spaces provide needed reprieve from everyday stressors, acting as escape facilities. Being able to escape fast-paced urban environments improves the health by reducing stress and depression and improving the ability to focus, pay attention, be productive, and recover from illness. Another little quote: a classic study demonstrated that patients with views of trees versus views of a brick wall had shorter hospitalization, less need for painkillers, and fewer negative comments in the nurse's notes. Now comes the Islamic bit. What modern science and scientific knowledge has now learned was known to traditional and religious societies. The Holy Quran emphasizes the importance and significance of trees and plants. Quote from the Quran: trees bow down in adoration. And the Prophet of Islam said, quote, whoever plants a tree and it matures, Allah plants a tree in paradise for that person. Another tradition of the Prophet: if a Muslim plants a tree or grows grain and a bird, a person, or animal eats from it, it will be counted as charity from him. It is never considered too. This is a very significant tradition, hadith of the Prophet. A companion asked him, if I have a seedling and the day of judgment comes, what do I do? And the answer was, plant it. I mean, does it really matter? It's the end of time. No, plant it. So it's your every action. Don't worry about the consequence. Don't look to the future. Do right when and where you can. So what we and then the judgment holds that the health of the people must be considered whilst making decisions, and decision makers should understand the health impacts of the decisions before they implement it. So decisions taken about the manner in which public land is to be utilized have demonstrable direct impacts on health. It is noted that the Quetta city planners are not considering the health consequences their decisions will have on people's lives. They ought to have carefully considered the matter in which the land around the park should be utilized. So this was the last of the 5 judgments that I wanted to mention, and just wanted to show the practical connection of the Islamic tradition with the constitution and the law, and in judgments. Yeah, we're talking about trees. Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet, had said something so beautiful. Trees are poems that the earth writes upon the sky. Something like that. Quite profound. So the need is there to protect all living things. I think that cannot be stated enough. A few verses from the Quran again. The message is very clear and succinct. Do not waste. Verily, he does not like those who waste. And there's another big problem in our societies, waste. And do not act wickedly by spreading corruption in the earth. The justification for taking life, there are only two in the Holy Quran. The Quran says that if you kill a nafs, it doesn't talk about Muslims, it doesn't talk about men, it talks about nafs. Nafs means soul, anyone with us, any human being with a soul. If you kill anything with a nafs, it is as if you killed all of humanity. And anyone, so if anyone saves a life, it is as if he saved all of humanity. The only two exceptions are if by a court of law, it's punishment of death. And the other is those who spread corrupt fisad fil ard, which is literally corruption in the earth. So, I mean, probably those who were considering expounding on the Holy Quran, for us Muslims, it is for all times. Maybe the significance may not have been realized what it is being said then, but today it is becoming all too important for our survival. Another Quranic verse, and do not do mischief on the earth after it has been set in order. Another quotation, corruption has appeared in the land and the sea for what their hands have earned, so taste a part of what you have earned. And how we should act as human beings, there's a message there as well. And the slaves of the most gracious are those who walk on the earth in humbleness. And when the ignorant address them, they say, Salaman, peace. So I think we are all know the problem. I think by now everybody, there are no climate deniers, there are no global warming deniers. Everybody has now, the message has finally sunk in. What are we doing about it? We are doing practical things, but I think what really would resonate and maybe bring about a change, and it's for every society to, is when you feel about something. I mean, and what do you feel about in Islamic societies? Probably the faith. So if you can make that a very powerful message, it conveys and it makes people think differently on waste. I mean, it's sort of, I've even stopped people. I don't waste water. I'm using it for ablution purposes. A tradition of the Prophet, a hadith, he admonished a companion, do not waste water. He retorted by saying, what if I'm using it for ablution? And the Prophet responded, and even if you're standing next to a flowing river, of course, there was no flowing river, but the extreme example was, even if you're standing next to a flowing river. So it's a very powerful environmental message. The question is, how do you make it, how do you convey it? How do you make it relevant, and how do you apply it? So that's what I have tried to demonstrate.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Well, what an extremely sort of stimulating and thought-provoking lecture. And just standing back in general terms, so much debate about the environment and, as you said, Ian, what we do about it and how do we persuade people, whether the politicians, the lawmakers, just ordinary people in their houses, that take the environment seriously and what they need to do. And so much of the debate, at least in this country, does seem to be based on science, facts and figures. There tends to be the idea that I think if we hit people with shocking messages and graphs and the image of the terrible things that are going to happen, it might make people sit up and take notice. And what you're describing is, in a way, going about it the other way around. It's looking at it in much more positive terms. You know, how do we connect the environment to ourselves as human beings, to our religious beliefs, to a vision of the world as it ought to be? And there's something I think is extremely attractive about that, which we don't hear enough of in, well, certainly in this country, or the bit of it I inhabit anyway. So anyway, that was a wonderful thing to hear from you. Given that we're in a law faculty, of course, I've been thinking about the, the legal implications of what you're saying. And it seems to me that what you're describing about the way you're using your opinion of Islam and the Quran and Hadith and so on in your judgments, it raises some pretty fundamental issues about law. Obviously, the relationship between law and religion. And because we're used to thinking of in jurisprudence of the need to distinguish law from religion. But as those of us who know anything about Islamic law, and I don't know a lot about it, know that there isn't really any sensible distinction between law and religion in the Islamic world. And it seems to me that, you know, in an Islamic country, but one that has a common law system, you're sort of bringing the two things together within the framework of the common law system, which is very interesting. So I did wonder whether you might want to comment on that.
I think we're not too different from Britain. The head of the church is the Queen.
Yeah.
So,
well, indeed, yes. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's in our context, the Constitution enables as a practice, as a judge, can I do it? That's the fundamental question for me. Yes, there is a way and can be done. Now, if you can use something for the good, I don't see any harm in using it. I mean, you can write the same judgment, do this, it will be a dry judgment, will probably nobody will read, will have no impact on society, or you make it a judgment which people can connect with, and they may themselves start doing things like, I mean, you know, I grew up, my mother used to say, why did you leave the light open? I mean, that was it, don't waste water. I mean, she didn't tell us that, okay, this is the reason, or there's Islam. It was just the kind of thing how we grew up. I mean, waste was kind of considered bad. I mean, you know, but if you raise waste to the level of a sin, you know, okay, then a believer will become extremely cautious. Okay, I'll just turn the tap on just slightly. And do I really need to put on the light here? No, there's enough light we can sort of do without it. Do I need to turn on the heating? I think I'll just put on a jacket or a sweater. Do I need a bottle of water, plastic? And where will this bottle of water go? It will stay around for the next 1,000 years. And I'll just maybe drink from the tap. Or I'll take that chance or the risk. I mean, so we have changed. I mean, where did the plastic bottles come from? I mean, it's even, I mean, I was growing up, I'd never seen water in a bottle, plastic bottle, because water was, you could drink it. Incidentally, there was a case as I practiced as a lawyer. It was aquifer depletion by a well-known water bottling company. And I was representing those who didn't want this thing to be set up, their water bottling plant. And it was very difficult. So I came up with the concept. It was not used in Pakistan, the public trust doctrine, borrowed from the West. And then I took the bottle of water and put it, I was a litigating lawyer, so a bit dramatic, put it on the table. And I said, you know, the cost of this, the water is not made by the company. The plastic probably costs a few pennies, and they're charging so much. And petrol, the same amount, costs less. So it was pretty absurd. I mean, what have they added? Put water which comes from creation or nature and just put it in a plastic bottle, and wow, you pay so much money for this. Why should I pay so much money when I can get it for free? So it questions how the way you live And unless we, I think, unless we make those, we have to make those changes. I mean, it's not just enough, okay, scientific, we have that knowledge. Scientific, I don't say that one should exclude the other. Scientific knowledge just further reiterates the point. So maybe someone is not a believer, someone is an atheist, agnostic, maybe no faith, whatever. So, okay, scientific knowledge will appeal to him. Maybe poetry appeals to him, maybe not religion. So it depends what particular nerve that you can touch, and does this work? And if you're doing it for the good, why not?
I mean, it's difficult to think of any people who wouldn't be touched by the sorts of images and stories from the Quran that you've been telling us. But yeah, so I've been thinking as well about what your examples tell us about the purposes of law, the procedural development, and all the sources of law. There's so many sort of big questions out there, but I don't want to monopolize you. I think people, the whole audience, should have the opportunity to put their hands up and ask questions at any point. I'm very happy to carry on asking questions, but anyone want to? Yes, please.
Have their own ways. Somehow hierarchical religion.
That's a very good question. There are countries which have environment as a your right of itself. We don't specifically have it, but constitution is a living document, and how it's interpreted and how it's applied in a way sort of helps that. What, as the examples I've given, the right to life I used, the right to profess your faith, to live a life of dignity. These are fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution, which cannot be abridged. You can build a lot around them or use them as foundations to achieve what you have mentioned. Like I gave rights by using that my right as a human being, as a believer, is undermined when you take the right of a prayerful being away. Prayerful being a bird. So because it violates my faith. So it's sort of an indirect way one is achieving that, but specifically there is, it doesn't mention that, but sort of, these are sort of ideas that one can use. But for as far as the Markha is concerned, I mean, that was a violation of a law as well. I mean, that could have been a strict, simple legal thing that you go to jail or whatever. But I brought in Islam on two aspects. One about creation itself, the other about using a community service order to further the environmental cause, sort of planting trees, sort of pay back to society. And the person who plants trees also feels good, well, I planted these trees, okay, good. So it's a win-win situation for all. So there are devices to be used. That's where I think it's far simpler if you put it in black and white to follow it. But when it's not there, then using it like that, it's all within the legal parameters. It's not like going completely sort of, where is this coming from, you know? So but you have to slowly construct it, and you have to lay the foundation and build on it. Like if I just started at the end, you will say, hey, hang on, where is this all coming from? So you have to kind of construct it slowly, bring in the constitution, bring in the fundamental rights, layer them, and then come to that result. And probably the answer would be, okay, I see. As opposed to, is the judge nuts? Okay, sorry, putting it bluntly.
Well, thinking, well, I've got plenty of questions to ask. So, several times when you're describing your judgments, you talked about persuading people or tools for getting the environmental message across. And I assume there you're thinking about a number of different people. You're partly thinking about the policymakers, the politicians, but also just people in general. I'm not sure how often our Supreme Court would explicitly talk about that as an object of a style of judgment or the wider effect of a judgment. Is that something which is particular to your own style of giving judgments? Is it something the Supreme Court in Pakistan thinks about particularly? I suppose it comes back down to the question of, what are you doing in the Supreme Court? You just making a judgment in this case, or sort of thinking about the wider society?
The bulk of the work is kind of, you're just deciding that particular case, that appeal or whatever. But there are cases which come up like this. Pakistan has a written constitution, unlike the UK. So, but sometimes it's more rigid here than there. I mean, we would imagine the other way around, where a written constitution would be more rigid. I mean, probably common law is more rigid. I don't know. I can't comment upon, I'm not qualified to comment upon your courts. But when an opportunity presents itself, what harm is there? I look at it from that point of view. And am I doing something which is within the constitutional and the legal sphere, or is something too removed, or am I sort of rewriting the constitution? And I question myself, and I said, no, it is, and I can take it forward. And is it something that even if one resonates with one person, that's one more. So it's, the message goes ahead. So it is, of course, attending to the facts of that particular case and deciding it, what to do with that person, the violator. And then maybe the message carries, maybe the press carries it, so otherwise who's interested in what happened to this person or that person? Maybe the media gets traction, maybe the message travels, maybe someone is curious enough who then actually goes to the Supreme Court website and checks the link and say, oh, I want to read this judgment. Maybe someone here doing a PhD is motivated and say, aha, now I'm going to read these judgments. And maybe he shares them with his friends. So,
indeed, yeah. So that leads on to another question maybe, which is, what about your colleagues on the Supreme Court? What do they think of the attitude you're taking and the judgments you're giving? Are you regarded as being rather different from them? Are they saying, oh, it's wonderful, we should all be doing more of this? Or are they all following the same path?
Everyone has their own. I mean, there are judges who are very environmentally conscious. So colleague is Mansoor Ali Shah. He gives these fantastic judgments on climatic change. I think probably the only in the world, which are very definitely useful to read. I rely on a little more on religion. I mean, he doesn't, but we are sort of, our commitment is, the cause is the same. So sometimes people feel a bit awkward dealing with religion. Okay, this is something you leave at home, or, I don't want to know about it, okay, too touchy, too problematic, this, that, the other, and that there are those people also. So, I think there are all kinds of people. I mean, there is no, as such, anyone opposed to it. I mean, if that answers your question, there are people who are very sort of supportive. We have not many in the Supreme Court.
Yes,
Okay, just thank you very much for your excellent
talk and also your conversation with Fernanda that create an interesting comparative observation for in Asia about the relationship between not religion but tradition and modern law, whether there is a tension between in South Korea, for example, there are many cases in which the court use Confucian value cases. One example is a law saying that children are not allowed to sue their parents. And this is something was a group of people changed that law in the constitution for the reason that that law violates their right to equality. And the court still upheld the law, saying that this law is consistent with our Confucian tradition of video. The decision within the court is very divided. Judges saying no, six judges said that this law is unconstitutional. 5 judges said that this law is constitutional, but the law still survived because according to South Korea law, they require 2/3 majority for the decision. But the story tells us about the tension between liberal values and traditional values in so my observation and my question is there any tension between your principles in your judgment with all the alternative values within Pakistan society, or maybe other fundamental or universal values that inform the legal system in Pakistan?
Unfortunately, religion has been used in a lot of negative things for which I don't see any at all justification. So if the perpetrators, okay, fine, they are uninformed, misinformed, whatever. But when they get so much traction on the media, why not use the same thing for good? Unless you can say that what you're doing is detrimental to the environment, is causing pollution, is causing destruction of the environment, I would do it. And that is not just regarding using Islam. I've used Coleridge. I've cited other poets. I mean, it's not something like it's just, whatever tool comes within grasp, which advances. If you're doing something negative, you shouldn't do it at all. That's my answer. Now, if, I don't know, but that would be a slightly different thing. The example that you gave about children suing parents. So I don't know, I really don't know what is the correct path here. Should it be allowed or not allowed? I mean, I have not thought about it, but it's not an area which I will immediately say, okay, there's nothing, no harm in this. So there it may be more nuanced debate, more balance in what the things that I'm using it for. I don't think there is, okay, no, climate change is good. Okay, like global warming is good or destruction of the environment is good. I mean, I don't think anyone will say that. But in that case, I'm not clear which is the good or the right. I don't like using good, correct terms, but I wouldn't know the answer. I mean, if you just ask me now, what should it be? I'll have to pause and really think about it, reflect, and maybe my faith comes into it or it doesn't come into it, but I don't know the answer. So it's not cut and dry there. That is more, I don't know what the word to use is, but if it was cut and dry, use it. If it's not cut and dry, don't use it. I mean, you take a sort of weird one position and sort of everybody looks at you in wonderment, where is he going with this? So, okay, I mean, if it generally takes you along the right path, do it. I don't know if that answers it, but it's interesting to note other jurisdictions also do things like that. And Korea, this is Korean case or Singapore case? Korean case, okay. Okay. So.
well, that relates to another question I wanted to ask, which is about knowledge of Islam in particular. I mean, as you're saying, some people use religion for the wrong purposes, and it's a widespread criticism we've heard of, lots of Islamist groups, so they're real or not really good Muslims. They don't know what it's about. And just the extent to which I've just tried to dip my toe into the very sort of complex, troubled waters of Islamic law, it just makes me, realize just, we have centuries of very high level learning and intellectual endeavor and quantities of scholarship and so on and so on. I mean, it's a lifetime's work to become an expert in the Islamic tradition, Islamic law. Is that part of the training of judges in Pakistan? Do you rely, when you're looking to Islamic sources for support for your judgments, do you have experts to advise you? How's your, those of you who've been educated, I assume primarily in the state sort of common law tradition, what sort of training or expertise can you rely on when looking to Islamic?
I did my law here in the UK, called the bar at Middle Temple. So it's definitely wasn't part of my legal education, nor is it part of the legal education back home. When we deal with Islam, it really deals with inheritance rights, property distribution, preemption, very typical matters of, child custody, when the mother has it, when the father has it. So it's more sort of pigeonholed in these sort of areas. Where else do we have Islam? Family laws.
Charitable trusts, are they?
Yeah, but they're sort of, things which are completely disused. I mean, they're not even used anymore. So it's very, very nominal kind of areas that they are trained in. They are trained in family laws, or where the custody would go, and how a marriage can be dissolved, or the consequences of a dissolution of marriage, haq meher, and things like that. So, but those are very sort of technical matters of fiqh. It's sort of more or less, it's all been very well documented and established. You just pick up a book and say, okay, grandmother share this much, parents share this much, son share this much, daughter share. It's all very mathematical. It doesn't really need much thinking. I mean, it's sort of virtually automatic. This is really a personal interest. And one of my sources of inspiration is not very far from here. I don't know if I can mention Cambridge at Oxford. Okay.
It's okay, as long as you don't do too much.
Cambridge Muslim College, the Dean of Divinity, Dr. Timothy Winter. I don't know if you heard of him or not. He is, the ocean of knowledge. Is Islamic scholar of the top level. I have not met him, but I hear his YouTube talks. Quite an inspiration. And there's a Cambridge mosque, which is very interesting because it's built on environmental sort of principles, and it got some prize here as well. Sort of just saying, sort of inspiration can come. And he is a convert, or some say revert. His Islamic name is Abdul Hakim Murad. So very profound lectures. If you ever have time, I would recommend it. You visit the mosque also. It's very interesting place to see, purely as a touristy thing even. So it can come from anywhere. I mean, another very interesting speaker is Hamza Yusuf of Zaytunia. Hamza Yusuf was a Catholic, converted, and he has a college in California, Zaytunia College. Interesting, very lively talker. He's a very learned person. So it's not only learning from our tradition, but learning from here. So it's interesting. The knowledge somehow got lost somewhere. It's been picked up, and it's been sort of the sources, if it's not necessarily coming from where you would expect it to come from, and it's been preserved somewhere else. So that's the beauty of of knowledge and wisdom that you can learn from a child.
Exactly.
Some
Well,
science children
yeah.
say the most
Yeah.
profound of things.
Indeed. I mean, the more we look at history of knowledge, the more we realize that things, what we think of as the Western tradition has really traveled from ancient Greece through the Islamic world and back into medieval Europe. So knowledge certainly travels.
Yeah, it's very
around.
interesting. I mean, if I may say share a personal little thing.
Mm.
I know my son was praying, so I just asked him, who is Allah? He was a little sort of, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old.
Mm.
I thought he'll so. The answer, you know what the answer is? Big boss. Okay. I thought about it and I said, as good as an answer as any. So wisdom can come from anywhere.
Well, probably you ought to sort of wrap up soon, please. Yeah.
One of the fundamental rights in the Constitution, which can't be infringed, is right to own property. The only exception is that you have to acquire land, for a public purpose, and then you have to compensate the owner. So, one, it has to be a public purpose. Second, you have to compensate the owner. I mean, you're making a road, you're making a bridge, you're making, I don't know, electric power plant, an airport, whatever. You need land. It may be your land. It might be the most convenient one. So though your land is protected, nobody can do it. But if there is a mechanism for that under the Land Acquisition Act, and then you have to be compensated for that land. So I don't know if that answers your question. There we are into a tricky domain because the Constitution also states that any land which is not owned by anyone is owned by the state. So maybe you're talking about Shamilat land, I don't know. So this is village common areas, but that's a more tricky area then, because the government would claim ownership of that land. This is our land. You're not the owner of that land. Any land not owned is owned by the state. So sort of the common law rights as exist here are not quite the same as there. You have some sort of right, but then it's a little more complicated. It's not black and white. There was I think then I'll be going off on a tangent. Any connection between Tibetan? May I ask a question? Am I permitted to?
Please.
Any Tibetan law and Islamic law, or
well,
any nexus?
I mean, as we were saying, what is Islamic law? What is Tibetan law?
The Tibetan law, you mean Buddhist law, right?
Well, traditionally there was very little law in Tibet. In fact, it was more government news, a theocracy. There was not a lot that was sort of written, not a lot of legal scholarship in Tibet. So, but certainly there are Tibetan scholars making arguments about the environment and appealing to Buddhist values. So to that extent, there's certain parallels with what you're describing. But of course, Tibetans don't have their own courts. They're part of China or India or Nepal. So the opportunity with these type of judgments is there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So so when they're part of like India and China and Nepal, So the law, you said Tibetan law, then where does Tibetan law feature there?
It doesn't really.
Okay.
It doesn't
okay.
really.
So it's
No.
sort of so really what they accept, they think that this is, and the other thing this is to follow. But that really is what something which will resonate with them.
But certainly the appeal to Buddhist principles
Okay.
would resonate very strongly.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of parallels with what you were describing, the principles, Quran and so on, with some of the principles that you find in about
Mhm.
respect for the environment and living creatures and so on.
I think there's one connection, if I may draw.
Please.
Yeah, there's a saying of the Prophet which says, go as far as China to gain knowledge. So it's always wondered which China was not a Muslim area or anything like that. Go as far as China to gain knowledge. So, maybe Tibet along the way. So it's very interesting work what you have done. Probably, is it the only kind of work, or is others have
There are
done
not a
this?
lot of people working on Tibetan law, has to be said. It's
Okay.
a niche area.
Niche.
Yes, yes. But as Son was saying, there are a lot of resonances with the sort of our interest in Asian laws more generally,
Mhm.
which this fits in with. Great. Well, maybe we should draw it to a close there. I mean, we carry on talking endlessly, but I think we must leave you to go on to other things. So can we just all thank you for a most stimulating and thought-provoking lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.